The term Greenskin dates back to ancient times when the Empire of Man was well and firmly established. The earliest documents referring to the collective of Orc and Goblin races was the Liber "They're raiding us," with the line simply stating, "The Greenskins are breaking down the door, and soon they will For centuries now, we've only known fear and resentment of these hulking beasts and diminutive sadists, but tonight, myself and my team of dedicated orcologists will reveal a hidden world not seen before by any member of the Empire or beyond. A world of savage beauty, filled with towering beasts, grand structures, arcane mysticism, and intense brutality. I, Archibald Signum Smythe, introduce you to the Green Planet. Our first focus is in the area colloquially known as the Badlands. Here, stories abound of brutal tribal warfare, mystic leaders, and all manner of ruined ancient structures. I sent the orcology team here to discover the secrets of the Greenskin tribal structure and their constant petty wars. The tribes of the Badlands mainly consist of orcs, who lead large roving warbands across the harsh landscapes in search of battle and loot. When two tribes meet, battle is inevitable. Our team managed to magically capture this scene as the tribe known as the Ed Splitters battled the Broken Claws for territory and loot. It was fierce and not for the faint of heart. In the aftermath, the defeated tribe joined the victors, resulting in a larger force for future conflict and more loot to be collected. Our orcologists equate this to a form of tribal confederation, where the larger war boss takes over the lesser tribe, adding to his power and influence over the land. Post-battle, our team discovered that the victorious Ed Splitters gathered numerous pieces of scrap. After sending in our observation halfling to watch the camp closer, he returned to explain that Greenskins take these materials and use them to crudely improve their own equipment and weaponry. A rough document can be seen here of how they upgrade their troops for future battles. A curious note here our halfling made was that the Ed Splitters actually made use of a crude tunnel network with which to make haste across the Badlands. Had our scout not had his wits about him, he may have likely been lost down there, or worse. After some more time spent observing this tribe, we determined that these tunnels are vast and allow not just this tribe, but many tribes to quickly traverse terrain that normally would be impassable or difficult to pass via conventional means. Some of these tunnels and underways were of dwarven design, but others were clearly made by the Greenskins. Evidence of battle could be found everywhere, and on one occasion, a battle did erupt between a goblin warboss and his warband and the head of the Ed Splitters, Gorgluk Ed Kicker's warband. It seems the fighting is never over for a warboss and his boys. Speaking of boys, to the vast majority of you here in attendance at the college, the common orc is a lumbering brute, wielding crude weapons and protected by rough, pieced-together armor. But many of you will have not seen the savage orc of the Badlands. These far more primitive-looking warriors are considered to be even more deadly than your average orc. Though their weapons are less advanced, their brutality will more than make up for such. Many a warboss of the Southern Badlands makes sure to bring some of these smaller tribes on board via trade of gold, teeth, and food in exchange for their services on the front line. A particular warboss out in the Badlands leads an entire tribe of such warriors, and his power is great, possibly enough to rival the largest of the bosses in the Badlands, such as Grimgor Ironhide. But more on them later. Possibly the most terrifying aspect of any orc army, however, is the unique aspect known as the Waaagh. This warcry or possibly mindset isn't fully understood by our teams out in the field, but from first-hand accounts from Imperial, Dwarf and Bretonnian troops, a Waaagh is not something to take lightly. My working theory is that as more fighting occurs in the lands, the more agitated the Greenskin becomes, and the thirst for battle increases exponentially. This in turn results in a war boss becoming the leader of a vast host of Greenskins, who rally to this particular boss, who sends the disorganized wave of violence toward a target. An example of such was caught via Arcology Team Cloud, who were trapped in a besieged settlement under assault by a Waaagh recently. The sky captures here, which I've marked, show the Orc army bringing in fresh, smaller forces seemingly out of nowhere. They then subsequently attack the settlement, and it seems that though the Waaagh is a powerful aspect of the Greenskins' ability to wage a war, it is one that they have scarce control over, and from my experience, they seem to prefer it that way. Also, Team Cloud were lost when the walls fell. Moving on. I feel now with the basis covered for you all regarding these fascinating creatures, we would then move on to the larger, more powerful war bosses that our teams have discovered in the field. We have several Orcology teams across the entire world researching these tribes and have found war bosses from the distant Badlands all the way to Bretonnia, and even closer to our borders in the mountain ranges to the west. Our first subject is the leader of one of the largest Badlands tribes, Grimgor Ironhide of Grimgor's Ardboys. The scattered history regarding this Black Orc paints a most violent picture. Grimgor is a fighter through and through, ruling his tribe with an iron fist and larger war axe. The team observed him starting fights within the camp seemingly at random. This would escalate as each day would pass until mass brawls would erupt, resulting in numerous dead and badly injured warriors. These numbers would be replaced quickly enough, and soon after, Grimgor would marshal his forces for a fresh fight with nearby tribes or other neighbours to his territory. Being a Black Orc, Grimgor tends to field a force of these elite troops when battle presents itself, and they seem to benefit from his presence on the field. Grimgor's Black Orcs have tougher armour and follow his orders to the letter, which seems to make them less likely to flee in the confusion of battle. Grimgor also seems to have a more organised system of loot collection compared to the other tribes. This translates to him having a larger slave force of smaller Greenskins known as Stotlings, who are too afraid to try and keep any of the loot for themselves, and thus his tribe have far more wealth in terms of gold and scrap. As an individual, Grimgor is an impressive specimen. Clad in thick armour and wielding a weapon almost as large as he, only the most brave or foolhardy would face him in battle alone. His axe has been seen to pierce almost any armour it hits, while his skill in battle reveals a level of cunning not expected from a Greenskin. Fear is a foreign concept to Grimgor. Even when staring down a force of shambling dead, he simply smiles before charging headlong into the mass of bone and rotting flesh. Before he was cruelly taken from this world, the orcologist Spasbecker the Dung was said to have screamed "melee expert" when fighting Grimgor after the team were found by scouts of the Ardboy tribe. Only Nolly Lightfoot of the Halfling Scouts would return to give us this magically captured record of the tribe. Thank you, Nolly.
No problem, thanks.
Orcology Team Squall went to the northern World's Edge Mountains in search of the Bone Rattlers tribe, led by the deadly but also mysterious Orc Lord known as Azhag the Slaughterer. Despite numerous warnings by the local dwarven contingent of the region, the team would forge a path through the inhospitable terrain to find their target. Unlike Grimgor, Azhag is a very different personality. Wearing a crown of iron which seems to grant magical powers of unknown origin, Azhag conducts his raids and campaigns with a level of strategy unseen before from the Greenskin tribes. He has access to dark magics the College of Mages deemed to be from the lore of death. This, combined with his abilities as a warrior, make him potentially more threatening than Grimgor, though the two have yet to meet in battle. This is only a matter of time. Like Grimgor, Azag's weapons are capable of piercing armor with little effort, while he himself is well armored and capable of shrugging off blows from his enemies. The team captured this battle against a dwarven patrol, showing how even finely crafted dwarven weaponry has trouble getting through, so to speak. As a final note, Azag has a tamed wyvern under his command. We know this because, once again unfortunately, Team Squall were attacked by him when they forgot to put out one of their campfires properly, and they were promptly discovered. Fortunately, the severed hand of the Crystal Sphere operator was discovered by a dwarven ranger, who was acting as a guide for the team. Every cloud, as they say. Returning to the Badlands, where Team Sid tracked down one of the most unpredictable Greenskin tribal leaders in Waaagh, the Great Green Prophet. Waaagh is a nomadic chieftain, rarely spending time in one place for long, but always moving with purpose. His tribe, the Bloody Hands, ready to unleash chaos on those that Waaagh deems to be under the gaze of the Greenskin gods, known as Gork and Mork. In a startling turn of events, Waaagh made contact with the team himself one evening after surrounding the camp and graciously killing only half of the team on the orders of Gork, or possibly Mork. Afterwards, Waaagh was happy to sit down with Ollie Plumpton and discuss the word of Mork, or Gork, and a little about himself. He informed Ollie that, under the guidance of the Orc gods, he gained his gifts of magical power and the ability to uplift the savage Orc tribes in the southern Badlands to greatness. He claims to be the driving force of the Waaagh in this mortal plane, and one day all tribes will follow him into the greatest Waaagh ever seen, when the hordes of chaos from the north descend upon us all and leave this world burning until the new age of Sigmar is brought about. Quite why Sigmar was mentioned is beyond us, but it was interesting nonetheless. Waaagh was also kind enough to show the team his warboar Spleen Ripper, a mount he sometimes uses in battle when he either crashes into the melee or casts spells from the back of it. Given his preference for spellcasting, he prefers to let the boys do the majority of the close-up work, while he discerns the messages of his gods. Afterwards, he gave each remaining member of Team Sid a commemorative wooden mask with his warpaint and some mushrooms before sending them on their way back to civilization. Moving on to Team Tidus now, as they travel to the seemingly quiet mountain ranges between the lands of the mysterious Wood Elves and the Empire. Nestled deep within these ranges is the tribe known as the Crooked Moon, led by the Goblin chieftain Skarsnik. Our team managed to gain access to the mountains via ancient underground tunnel networks that bypass the lands of Athel Loren. Skarsnik aims to recapture the dwarf hold of Karak Eight Peaks, but has to contend with the throng led by Belagar Ironhammer, who also moves to retake his ancestral home. Given the lack of orcs in these mountain ranges, Skarsnik relies on his fellow goblinoids to make up the majority of his forces. They flock to his banner en masse, creating a cheap but effective horde of fighters who Skarsnik drives towards his enemies without remorse. Skarsnik himself is seen to be a strong combatant. He will tell you himself. His spear is capable of piercing the heaviest armor, while our scouts have observed him easily dispatching larger foes such as rat ogres with ease. The current belief is that he combines his skill in melee combat with potent poisons created from the numerous fungus growing in the caves and tunnels in his mountain domain. Surprisingly, Team Tidus returned unharmed. Finally, we travel to the lands of the Bretonnian lords and the secluded locale known as Massif Orcal. Team Steiner searched for a means to observe the goblin chieftain known as Grom the Paunch. After offering to cook a grand meal for the chieftain in exchange for information about himself and his tribe, the team were welcomed into the camp. After several large meals, Grom happily regaled the team with his exploits, his many battles against the elves over the years, giving him an understanding of warring against them that most others would be envious of. He showed the team his goblin troops' snazzy armor, their rows of snotling pump wagons, and finally, his pride and joy, his cauldron. From this cauldron, Grom cooks his many unique meals, some of which have been said to grant boons to his forces, such as magical regeneration, increased alacrity, berserker rages, gold to spontaneously sprout from the ground, yes, improved eyesight, and much, much more. Then he forced all members of the team other than the halflings into the cauldron and allowed the halflings to leave due to the exceptional meal. So there you go, my fellow colleagues, the most deadly and impressive of the Greenskin lords we currently know about from across the many and varied lands of this world. Now, the scholars would be content to finish their work here, but I was determined to learn more about the orc, the goblin, the troll, and so forth. I gathered more intrepid explorers and scholars, namely survivors of the other teams, and sent them out to document the many troops of the Greenskin horde. So, once you've all had a quick break, stretched your legs, tried some of the Battenberg cake provided by Holly Harefoot Bakers, please return to your seats to learn more about the Greenskin lords, heroes, shamans, infantry, skirmishers, cavalry, monstrous creatures, and artillery, won't you?
Hello, Holly Harefoot Bakers here, and I'd just like to make you aware of our great additions, thanks to Mr. Spy's presentation, and for all you scrying in at home. We've got our wonderful selection of products, including Breton buns, high elf fancies, imperial shortbread, and for a limited time only thanks to this presentation, Greenskin selection, including the Crooked Moon cookies in banana flavour, the chocolate covered mork nuts, or, if you fancy, dark chocolate gork nuts. Delicious. Troll tea cakes, and startling pancakes for the little uns. Remember to visit Holly Harefoot's Bakers in the Altdorf Market Square. Thank you for listening, and now back to Mr. Spy's presentation. Thank you, bye.
Good to see you're all well fed and watered, yes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be moving on to the more specific elements of the Greenskin horde. I thought we should first look at what would be most commonly thought of as a tribal leader in the form of the orc war boss. Now, these war bosses are not your common garden variety orc. A war boss is a very large, very strong opponent for anyone to face in combat. The Greenskins' natural tendency to allow the largest of their unruly tribe to lead them is a fascinating element of Greenskin society. Imagine if Herr Dickerman was put in charge due to his, generous proportions, let's say. It would be somewhat chaotic. Now, drollness aside, the war boss is a no-nonsense combatant. My team's observations show a leader who prefers to bully his troops into line and then lead from the front. Equipped in heavy armor and usually carrying a shield and some sort of cruel melee weapon, the war boss is a tough opponent to defeat one-on-one. His natural charisma, shall we say, enables him to encourage his troops to greater acts of violence, and some have been seen riding atop a war boar, and a rare few atop a tamed wyvern, wouldn't you know? Yes, quite the subject to observe in their natural habitat. Other teams in the subterranean levels, who sadly lose more and more of their number with each journey, report that the goblins have been seen leading war bands of their own. Usually these are of their own kind, and very small numbers of orcs, but it isn't unheard of. Team Vincent documented this encounter between a great goblin shaman, as they named him. He seemed to have access to spells from the poorly understood Law of the Little Waaagh. Whenever the fighting got even slightly close to him, he immediately retreated, revealing a definite aversion to fighting up close, unlike the vast majority of the Greenskin kind. Much like the war boss, the goblin shamans have been seen using a nimble wolf mount, and even rarer but more intimidating, and the reason Team Vincent lost half the number, is a catchweb spider shrine. Some of you will know these as Arachnarok spiders. Quite the sight, isn't it? Oh, yes. Keeping with the Lord of Goblins for now, we have the Night Goblin War Boss. The Night Goblins are a strange and slightly unhinged offshoot of the Goblin Horde. obsessed with mushrooms and their mind-altering effects, as witnessed when Henge Tubfoot ate several and danced repeatedly for 6 days straight, all the while claiming he was the Sultan of Sol and that dance lived or died by his hand. Night Goblins rely on such to enhance their combat abilities. The Night Goblin Warboss then is an expert melee combatant who uses poisons to debilitate its foes. Though not well armoured, they usually carry shields bearing some twisted iconography for some protection while in combat. Night Goblin Warbosses sometimes ride into battle atop great cave squigs, making their fight with them an altogether different proposition. So that covers the more commonly cited lords of the numerous tribes that roam this earth. Each are just as deadly as any of the previously mentioned lords, such as Grimgor and Azhag, but have yet to make a name for themselves. Fortunately, the brave men of the Empire prevent the green tide from washing over us each day, and more than a dozen or so warbosses die at the hands of our brave troops on the borders of our great territory, so not to worry everybody. Now, our next offering of insight concerned those who the orcs and goblins would consider heroes of their cause. The Goblin Big Boss, for instance, is a ruthless enforcer, on and off the battlefield. His skill in battle reveals a natural trait for dueling, making him a threat to any lord or hero he may encounter. Equipped with a set of armour and a shield, he can stand toe-to-toe with most opponents. When the war boss needs someone dead, the big boss is sent to do the job. Off the battlefield, they've been seen organising better loot collection post-battle, while others have been seen to sabotage settlements and even assassinating agents from foreign powers. Yes. Nothing is too sneaky for the big boss, apparently. One such story involved a big boss sneaking into a settlement dressed as a merchant from Araby. Apparently the guard had no reason to think that people from Araby wouldn't have Greenskin as well, and he proceeded to set fire to the marketplace before escaping with 2 bags of pig's trotters. Moving on. The Night Goblin Shaman, however, is much like his Warboss counterpart. Averse to combat of any sort, he prefers to cast his spells from the little Waaagh from the rear line. If pressed into combat, his spear is dipped in the same poisons that the other Night Goblins used to drive off any would-be attacker, but he doesn't want that in the first place. Their ability to sneak around before a battle has resulted in a small ambush force being encountered in a vanguard position, leading to numerous deaths from these devious spellcasters. For something completely different, my research team designated as Zell tracked down the elusive but also incredibly repugnant river troll hag. Many had wondered for decades what the female of the troll species must look like, and after finally finding it, many wish we'd never started our search. River troll hags prefer watery habitats, as befits their name. They are large, imposing creatures who are just as cruel and prone to violence as their greenskin allies. Unlike other spellcasters in the greenskin ranks, the hag, being a troll, means she's just as capable in the front line as any other troll or orc. The slime and other unfortunate substances on her scaly skin protect her from melee weapons like natural armour. More troubling is the troll's natural ability to heal damage done to it to begin with. Fire can prevent this, but not everyone's running around with blessed blades of flame. The one upside to fighting these wretched creatures is their low intellect means they can quickly become confused in the din of battle, and without proper orders being shouted her way, she'll eventually decide to leave the field. These trolls also move without hindrance in water, so beware of one if you encounter it in this location. The final note about these beasts is their natural spell use, linked to the law of death. This makes them dangerous at distance, as well as up close, so remember to focus these monsters with arrow, bolt, magic, or even artillery, should the opportunity present itself. Keeping with the magical theme here, the Orc Shaman is a powerful foe, yet considered somewhat of an oddity in the Orc society. Most Orcs tend to view Shamans with an air of distrust as their species prefers the fight over spell use. Still, when the need arises, the Greenskins make good use of these Shamans who can cast spells from the lore of the Big Honestly, Jacobs, is this the best name you could come up with?
It just seemed fitting at the time.
Apologies, my dear audience members. Now, where was I? Yes, the Big Waaagh lore of magic. Orc shamans are poor hand-to-hand combatants, so if possible, they'll find a mount in the form of a war boar to carry them around the battlefield to safely cast spells where needed. The final hero of the Greenskin forces, and likely the most terrifying, is the Black Orc Big Boss. These mountains of muscle hold great sway within any warband they're part of, and take pride of place on the front line alongside the war boss. They fight wearing thick armour and heavy shields, while also displaying a raw brutality that reveals their expert combat skills. Some join the cavalry charge atop a snarling war boar, though most seem to enjoy the momentum brought home by one's own feet, alongside the boys as they crash into the front line and cause untold chaos and destruction. And so with these unique personalities covered, we'll move on to the infantry of the Greenskins. I shall however be stepping aside to allow Captain Ainsworth to inform you of these particular foes. Mr. Ainsworth, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Smythe. Now, many of you will have never heard of me before, but I am Captain Ainsworth, and someone who some of you may refer to as a sellsword or mercenary. In my time, I've encountered many beasts and foreign peoples of this world, and I've been asked today to explain to all of you fancy robe-wearing, soft-handed snobs what a greenskin looks like, how it fights, and the best way to kill them, with extreme prejudice. Now, to keep things simple, I'm going to discuss these creatures in fighting order, or for the less military-minded here, the ones that poke you with spears or cut with swords, the buggers that shoot arrows, the sods that ride on wolves or boars, and then the monsters that they bully onto the battlefield. The smallest and easiest for novices like you to get to grips with is the common goblin. They might be the size of a halfling, but lack any of the culinary skill, charm, or the hairy feet. No, the goblin's a cruel and malicious little so-and-so who enjoys inflicting pain and creating chaos wherever they go. Orcs tend to use large numbers of them in their front line to absorb missile fire or distract armies from the real threat approaching from flanks or the rear. As such, they could be considered expendable. That doesn't mean they aren't stupid. When not being bullied by an orc war boss, a goblin horde can be surprisingly cunning and actually more tactical and creative than their largest brutish brethren. Goblins tend to prefer spears when fighting due to the extra reach it affords them, and it also makes them feel taller. Alone, a single goblin's a little threat, but in numbers, they quickly overwhelm any single formation. They have little in the way of armour, usually, but they like to carry simple, makeshift shields to protect themselves. Remember that just because they're small and physically weak, they can stop a cavalry charge dead in its tracks of all those crude spears. I can't recall the number of times I've seen a foolish Lord Commander waste good men on a foolish charge onto the front of a goblin spear wall. Night goblins are a different breed altogether. These robe-wearing bleeders prefer ambush tactics in their subterranean dwellings, wielding poison blades to hamper larger foes physically. They still suffer from the same size disadvantage as any other goblin, but instead of spears, they prefer crude swords and daggers, perfectly suited for fighting in their tunnels. Again, they wear little armour as the better equipment goes to the bosses or the orcs, so they make do with crude shields and a fanatical devotion to Mork, or Gork, depending on the day of the week. Night Goblin fanatics, however, are extremely dangerous and should be eliminated immediately to avoid severe losses. Hiding within their ranks are something they refer to as a spinning loony. These goblins have ingested a lot of substances and they become entranced, swinging a large ball and chain around. The other goblins push them toward the enemy line and cause a lot of damage. The best bet is to shoot any night goblin you see first, to make sure they aren't hiding any loonies. The final goblin unit you will never see coming unless you keep your wits about you is the Nasty Skulker. And pardon my Bretonian, but these bastards are what gave me this scar here, and I won't let another one get close enough to try and finish the job. Nasty Skulkers are expert stealth fighters, moving across the battlefield unseen until the last moment. They prefer long daggers, which are perfect for piercing armour, and while they have the advantage against their opponents, these opportunistic murderers will go on a killing spree unless the proper application of force is brought down upon them with the wrath of Sigmar. War bosses deploy these units ahead of the main force to set traps or spring ambushes,
and when they start to lose the fight, they've been known to throw smoke bombs to cover their retreat or slow their target's movement. Now that covers the goblins. Now we move on to the larger threat of the horde, the orc. The most commonly encountered orc then is the boy, or boys as they call themselves when in a group. Orc boys are simple combatants. They don't go in for your fancy flanking or ambushes. No, the boys will just rush the target and let their muscle and ferocity do the job. They wear light armour, generally, and carry shields for protection from arrows as they close in. Orcs tend to use one-handed weapons of varying quality, and design from spike clubs, looted swords and axes, or more exotic weapons from whatever they can kill. They're tough as old boots physically, feel little pain, and tend to view a tough fight as a fun time. Your best bet is to aim for the head or the throat and swing it to put them down quickly. The boys that prove themselves to be capable in numerous battles grow larger and tend to form units known as big uns. These then tend to find the fight where it's thickest, or what looks to be the toughest unit on the field, and aim to fight that specifically. They wield two weapons usually and wear heavier armour to compensate for a lack of a shield. I strongly advise you shoot them with your magic, or order every man capable of firing a bolt or musket ball to do the same, to prevent massive casualties. Again, they don't think tactics are all that important and tend to rush you. This can allow you to throw a flanking force into them when they're engaged, or even slam them with some of the Empire's finest cavalry to really crush them. Bloody hell, the Black Orc. In short, you should avoid a direct confrontation with a Black Orc squad at all costs unless you have overwhelming numbers on your side, or a very brave group of men willing to stand toe-to-claw with these muscle-bound monsters. Black Orcs wear the heaviest armour, wield the largest weapons, and hit like steam tanks at full pelt. I've killed a dozen or so in my time, and each time it was nearly the death of me. I prefer fighting a vampire over all things Black Orc. Don't rely on breaking the morale of them either. They know no fear, and they take on all comers with glee. Only demons have the same lust for battle as they do. Armour-piercing weapons will work best, so bring your best musketmen or cannon to whittle their numbers down, so your poor bastards in the front line can have a chance in Khorne's realm of defeating them. On a slightly different note, the savage orcs of the Badlands might look funny with their face paint and near nakedness, but these primal warriors are more deadly than your regular orc boy or even a biggin. They genuinely believe the war paint they dab gives them the protection that it does, and for some reason it works. I've seen ogre mercenary blades slide across their belly and not open a wound. Round out the savageness of their attacks in a frenzy-like mindset, and suddenly they aren't so funny to look at. Worse though are the savage orc biggins. These are the savage orc, but larger and more bleeding terrifying. Again, they believe in the war paint protection, and they hit harder, live longer, and generally cause more problems for your commanders of any force unfortunate enough to encounter them on the long roads through the Badlands. Run them over with heavy cavalry, shoot them with a lot of arrows, or throw bodies at them until they stop thrashing around. Usually works. Ogre mercenaries work a treat if you've got the cash, given their large size and willingness to fight for money and food. So with the ones that will stab you to death covered, let's move on to the ones that will shoot you to death. These cover things like Goblin arrow boys, Orc arrow boys, and the like. Goblins aren't the most enlightened creatures when it comes to fighting or tactics, but they realise the benefit of not being hit in the face with a sword. Plenty of their kind turn to simple bows and shoddily made arrows to do their work. Now, Goblin archers aren't known for accuracy. A single archer can fire arrows all day and never hit their intended target. But when 100 or so all fire in the same direction, some do hit. Counterfire works well enough to thin their numbers and force them to retreat, usually, since they wear less armour than their spear-wielding dregs. Most armours and shields used by the Empire will protect well enough, but that doesn't mean you should let them get away with shooting without some response. Nothing's more ignoble a death than being shot by a goblin. The night goblins also employ arrows to cause casualties with a little more efficiency. On average, they seem more experienced than the type found roaming the hills and plains of the Badlands. Add to this the fact that night goblins use poisons on all of their equipment, and if that stuff gets into your system, you'll certainly see things. Deeply weird and strange things. Things that'll stay with you forever. Like a bearded Swedish man with two heads. One seeing the future, the other seeing the past. They also have the same fanatics in their ranks, so the spinning loonies are just as big a threat to any man or beast, charging you head on. Orcs also bring their own archers to the battle, though in far fewer numbers. Orcs view any of their kind who don't want to get stuck into the fight as weak and cowardly. They're just as bad as when aiming as their short-arsed cousins, but the difference is that when you charge them, you're still fighting an orc with all that muscle and ferocity. The advantage most infantry or cavalry have in the thick of it is that Arab boys and their light armour aren't meant for the cut and thrust of a sword fight, and they can be killed quite easily. The final foot skirmishing unit encountered are the savage orc Arab boys. They can't quite hit the broadside of a steam tank either, but their war paint acts as a kind of armour, somehow, while they also make for decent combatants in the melee when they run out of ammo. Savage orcs can go feral, as well as making them frenzy on the field. I've seen entire units of these warriors fight Kemrian war sphinxes without fear. Skilled warriors are best at putting these monsters down quickly to avoid heavy losses. Looking at my notes then, that's the skirmish troop covered. If any of you lot have questions, save them for after the presentation. My time's precious and my fee high. Good? Good. Now we move on to what you all will call the cavalry. Since we have a theme here of small to large, let's start with the Goblin cavalry. The most commonly seen scout of any Goblin force is the Wolf Rider. Groups of these spear-equipped goblins will range far during a battle, looking for the perfect opportunity to flank your skirmish line or hit the artillery team. They rarely charge other mounted troops given their lack of armour and small size compared to your average warhorse. Keep an eye on these troops when they're moving around to counter any sudden flanking attacks. Goblins found in the forests away from the wood elves will usually make some pact with the giant spiders of the region. Though many of them get eaten by the spiders, enough of the goblins will eventually tame the smaller members of the brood, using them as frankly terrifying mounts. Bugger the goblin on the back, beware the mount itself. These creatures will cause poisonous wounds to anyone they bite and have incredible speed. Spider risers usually strike from hidden positions as well, so always be wary of an ambush force ahead of the main Greenskin line when dealing with them in these regions. Once again, we see the night goblins being their usual selves with their own tame squigs. Now, squigs are, in simple terms, bellies on legs. They're constantly hungry and will eat virtually anything they come across that isn't larger than their own mouth. Night goblins use these bouncy bastards as mounts, hanging on for dear life as the stomach with eyes and teeth lopes toward the line. Their teeth are very strong and can puncture armor with little effort. Just because they look ridiculous from a distance doesn't mean they aren't dangerous. Just to make your life more miserable, the more affluent night goblins also armour up their squigs to give them more protection. They can cause poison and, like the spider riders, will also lay an ambush before springing out to charge, so keep a forward scout unit ahead of the line to spot these threats before they eat your front line. Literally. Orcs, however, are far less bothered about the subtlety of cavalry use. Shock and awe is their way of mounted combat, and for the most part it works. Boar boys will charge infantry and cause massive damage, and their weapons combined with the boar's tusks pierce armour like a knife through parchment. Counter-charging or spears work best when the mob come thundering towards you, unless you can get crossbowmen or musket lines focusing them down. Like your regular boys on the foot, the mounted version also have biggins. Boar boy biggins prefer to target other cavalry or larger units. They want to fight the biggest thing on the field and prove they're the strongest. Some generals use this against them by putting heavy armoured cavalry or troops in open positions for the biggins to charge, knowing that they'll attack and then cut them down with crossfire. However, if your commander is a rich ponce just out of officer school, you'll regret the day he doesn't draw these troops out and allow your finest to be squashed under hoof. You've been warned. And finally, some of you here may have guessed that even the savage orc tribes have their own boar troops. They work in much the same manner as the boys and the biggins before, but rely on their war paint for protection and sheer savagery when attacking. Simplicity is sometimes the best approach, and the orc savages have been highly successful with a head-on charge into the front line. That isn't all though for the mounted units. Much like our own forces, the Greenskins have adopted mounted skirmishing tactics and have honed them over the years. Unsurprisingly, the most common mounted archer that the Greenskins have in their horde is the Wolf Rider archer. employed in much the same way as the regular wolf riders, but with now the added annoyance of being attacked from range instead. The smart wolf rider will rely less on being accurate and focus more on being a pain in the arse. They will run regular hit-and-run attacks. Unless you have something faster than a pack of wolves, you'll struggle to halt them. That said, once they take a few losses, they usually turn tail and run. The other mounted archer is the Forest Goblin Spider Rider Archer. That's a mouthful, that one. Just as fast as the melee version, they have the added annoyance of poisoning your troops with each hit. Counter fire is key, or a well-placed artillery barrage. Some of your fancy magic can also hurt them as well, if not outright rout them from the field. The canny Orc commander will keep these units moving to prevent them from being caught by enemy cavalry or return fire. And that isn't all that the Greenskins have in their arsenal of crude weapons. Goblins and Orcs have chariots at their disposal. The Goblin Wolf Chariot is a deadly unit for any infantryman to encounter. These are fast and extremely hard to keep up with, even for Bretonnian light horse troop. The Goblins love this fact, and they'll harass any pursuer with arrows from the back of the chariot, while the driver looks for weak spots to smash into. That said, if the charge is braced or poorly aimed by the driver, the chariots will then be caught up in the melee where they're vulnerable. It's a fine sight to see the crew of these contraptions dragged down and put to the blade. The Orcs use their traditional boars, farting as they go in the place of wolves, giving their chariot far more heft and overall more potential to smash through a line without slowing down. No Orcs shoot from the back of this one, preferring to have a member of the crew armed with a long polearm to slash and stab at any would-be attacker. Heavy armour has little effect in absorbing a charge from these creatures, and generally it's best to avoid them or hit them from the flank or rear if you can. A sturdy pike wall can do the same trick, since the bloody fools will just charge headlong, regardless of a row of spikes arrayed toward it. The Snotling, though, as the Horde prefer to refer to them as, is an altogether more pathetic creature than even a goblin. These tiny sods usually act as slaves for the Horde, or worse, dinner. However, they've been seen to go to battle in their own weapons of war, known as pump wagons. The Orcs and Goblins seem to have fun watching these things rattle around the field during a fight, and more often than not, the crew and the machine end up crashing and killing most of the riders. They come in three forms from what I've observed. The regular pump wagon works much like the chariot I mentioned previous. They can cause a lot of casualties if allowed to charge to the flank or the rear of a formation. Worse is when they are allowed to attack your precious artillery. It causes a lot of casualties. Engaging them in melee to prevent the charge is a solid tactic here, as the little ankle biters don't fight well and they die quickly. The Flapper equipped version has crude wings attached, which seem to add speed to it. They've been seen smashing right through hordes of zombies with ease and keep on going, no doubt linked to the Greenskins' odd power of belief. If they think it can move faster with them daft wings on the top, then somehow it does. The same tactic applies here as well. Fix them, shoot them, kill them. The final version then is the Spiky Rollers pump wagon. Somehow they've swapped their wooden wheels for large spiked rollers, which are admittedly quite intimidating to encounter. These wagons have such a powerful charge they've been seen to sunder armour as they crash into a target, making them an extremely powerful tool for the discerning Orc or Goblin war boss. The same basic tactics apply to defeat them, only you now have to accept the possibility of losing some well-armoured troops to get the job done. And I know a lot of you may have some nightmares after seeing these images, but things are about to get a whole lot worse. This next section of the presentation deals with the more monstrous foes that we face on a daily basis, beyond the strong walls of our city-states. Trolls are something your nan probably told you stories about when you were scared of a bump in the night. Trust me, they're far worse than any story you've heard as a child. One thing to get out there right away, trolls are exceedingly stupid. They make Skaven look smart, which is saying something. The Greenskins like using trolls because they hit hard and are hard to kill to begin with. They naturally regenerate most damage done to them unless it's fire, and even then you need a few good hits to drive them off or kill them outright. Armour's little effect against these attacks due to their sheer power, and alone against a well-drilled troop they don't hang around long since they don't like being hit. If, however, they have some organisation, they can be very dangerous and quickly break through the battle line. They are intimidating to face and have a nasty habit of vomiting on you to melt you if they get close enough. It's unfortunate and disgusting. A variation of the troll then is the stone troll. They literally eat rocks and has the effect of making their skin harder and more resistant to arrows and other ranged projectiles. They're as dumb as the food they consume in their mountainous lairs, and they break quickly if harassed enough by a canny commander. They do still regenerate, and they will punch through armour easy enough though. The final troll that you may encounter amongst the Greenskin ranks is the river troll. Now I know Smythe over there detailed the river troll hag that he dubbed a hero like some weird sycophantic toe rag, but I say they're a blight on this earth. River trolls prefer wet environments, and any fights in water with them will end badly for you. They move quickly in this terrain and have a distinct advantage against any troops fighting them there. The smell of these creatures is enough to make you retch, and can be so debilitating it makes your effectiveness drop. Shooting them's tough to score any decent damage since their body produces slime that absorbs shot and arrow with ease. Concentrated fire will eventually get through, but it can become a distraction that you can ill afford in some cases. Again, river trolls regenerate, so if you have a wizard on hand, point them in the direction of the troll and get them to do that funny hand thing they do to cast magic. Giants are luckily an uncommon sight amongst the Greenskins, but when they do decide to join the horde, things can get bad quickly. A single giant can stride through the front line and not even break stride, such is their power and ferocity. They kill infantry with ease and crush armour without too much effort either. Naturally, anyone who has encountered them up close describe it as terrifying. Fortunately, giants lack the knowledge of smithing, so they've never built armour or proper weapons for themselves, meaning they're easy to wound with ranged weapons, but being bloody giant, it also takes a lot to bring them down. Mounted archers can lead giants around in a merry dance, riddling it with arrows if allowed to, but your best bet is to fix it with some brave troops and then pound the bald sod of artillery and missile fire until it falls. In my time of soldiering, I've encountered 2 Arachnarok spiders, as their goblin mounts call them, and both times we took heavy losses killing them. The Arachnarok is a massive forest spider that the goblins have tamed for war. The crew ride on the back, firing down arrows dipped in poison from a crude shelf they've attached to the back, while the creature itself will tear through troop and cavalry like cannonball. The teeth and mandibles on these things can puncture armour with ease, and the hard hide is itself tough to penetrate. Halberd or speared equipped infantry can fend it off, maybe even kill it if the rider don't force it back quick enough. But a good cannonball or hellfire rocket barrage is what I prefer to use. Probably the strangest enemy I've ever seen amongst the Greenskins is the Rogue Idol. This rock effigy is imbued with the strange magic the Greenskins wield, and it slowly stomps toward the magic user's target without fear. Rogue idols are seen commonly during sieges, and the dwarves have had a lot of experience fighting with them underground. Suffice to say, they are terrifying to face, even if they are a little cumbersome looking. Their large rock fists smash armour with ease, and infantry units will struggle to deal with one of them alone. Your best bet is to approach them, pepper at range, and break it apart as much as possible before sending your best troops in to fix it in place and finish the job. Even then though, you're in for a tough battle. The final units the Greenskins have access to is their artillery. Goblins and snotlings are responsible for creating these weapons for the bosses to give them the ability to strike from extreme range. Goblin rock lobbers are rough approximations of dwarven grudge throwers, performing much the same job. They aren't as accurate, fortunately, but the idea of being flattened by a rock thrown by some cackling goblins is a galling one. Why did you stand there, Jenkins? Why didn't you stay near me? These weapons are also brought about when a siege is started, but are also seen in open combat. Counter-battery fire is effective, or just getting some knights around the flanks to run them off will work just as well, of course. The final unit is something distinctly goblin in origin. Captured goblins refer to this weapon as the Doom Diver Catapult. These contraptions launch a goblin equipped with a spiked helmet and leather wings, who then guides himself onto the target. Of course, he dies as a result of the effect, but once it hits the ground, it's rather significant. Stop laughing back there, you. Seeing your friend clutching his chest after a goblin's half buried in it is not a funny event. Right, Smythe, my job's done. Yes, very well, and thank you, Mr. Ainsworth, for your invaluable insight into the forces of the Greenskin. Well, I thank you all for attending today's presentation. Please remember to donate to the families of those who valiantly gave their lives in this endeavour, and a big thank you to Beard Save and Holly Harefoot Bakers for sponsoring this event. For anyone watching this on Crystal Ball, I thank you for scrying in and hope to see you all next time when my teams delve into the pleasure pits of Nagarond. Should be good, yes. Ooh, Nagarond.
Cool, Sigmar be praised that were a long one, but now that it's finished, remember you can always pick up our fine baked goods out in Altdorf and soon expanding into other markets. So remember, Holly Harefoot's Bakers. It's amazing. Oh, it's a place of magic and mystery. Anyway, thanks for watching everybody, and we'll catch you next time. And remember to always beware the orc and the goblin. But yeah, other than that, have a good one. Bye!
And yes, if you're still here after that, thank you again for everyone for sticking around for that. Nearly an hour's worth of footage of the orcs there. It originally started when Total War Warhammer 2 was what I was using, and then the Immortal Empires came out, and that has completely screwed up, as I joked about in the very first one in the Empire video. I will, once I've gotten through all the other factions, I'll go back and make a video that will sort of highlight and talk about the new start locations for the Empire, the Vampire Counts, the Dwarves, and the Greenskins for an updated Immortal Empires setting. But thank you everybody for watching. This one took a while, a lot longer, because there was some family stuff that happened. There was an unfortunate death and all the rest of it. And, it got delayed because of that. But thank you to the people at Creative Assembly who were very patient with me while I was getting those parts together. So I could be kept in the loop about any developments with Immortal Empires. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. The next one I'm going to do, I'll leave it up to any of you who listen to this in the comments. We'll see what we get. Will it be Beastmen? Will it be Warriors of Chaos? Or will it be Wood Elves? Let me know below. And other than that, yeah, have a good week everybody. And thank you for watching again. I enjoy making these, and I hope you enjoy watching them. And yeah, that's all I got. So yeah, proper bye now. See ya.